The last breaths of summer still lingered in the air, but for me, Emily Harper, the atmosphere at my family's lakeside house was strangely heavy and oppressive. The laughter, the warm yellow light from the lanterns hanging throughout the garden, and the faint scent of jasmine, all of it made me feel more out of place than ever. I stood huddled in a corner of the large living room, a glass of chilled juice in my hand, my eyes silently scanning each familiar face. At 34, I was a prominent Seattle attorney, handling complex commercial litigation and multi-million-dollar deals. But in my family's eyes, I was still just Emily, the quiet youngest sister who did some office job, a role I had quietly maintained for the past 3 years. My sister Olivia's clear laughter rang out, drawing the attention of the entire room. At 40, she was still the star of every gathering, the center of every conversation. Today, she wore a sparkling turquoise evening gown. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a smile that was always present on her lips, a smile that I knew was sometimes just lip gloss covering up the tiredness. Olivia was talking about her latest million-dollar marketing project, her voice full of pride and ostentation. The compliments and admiration from her aunts and uncles kept pouring in her direction, the undisputed pride of the Harper family. Next to Olivia was her fiancé, Daniel. He was dressed in a smart suit, tall, with a sharp gaze that was a little thoughtful. I knew very well who he was, a successful businessman. But what I knew even better was that 3 years ago, he had been my partner in an important legal project. At that time, I was the main lawyer representing his company. Daniel didn't seem to recognize me, or maybe he just hadn't. My heart suddenly skipped a beat. Just then, Olivia's eyes caught mine. She waved, a bright but slightly arrogant smile on her face. "Oh, Emily, honey, what are you doing here? Dreaming about numbers and spreadsheets again?" Her voice was shrill, loud enough for everyone around to hear. Olivia turned to Daniel, her voice dripping with boastfulness. "You know, our Emily does some kind of office work, sort of paperwork. Sounds safe, right? Not everyone dares to step into risky fields like you or me." Daniel smiled slightly, but his eyes lingered on me for a moment longer. There was something hesitant about it, as if a memory was quietly awakening in his mind. I kept my face calm, forcing a faint smile. "It's just a steady job, Olivia." I avoided Daniel's eyes, afraid that just one look would be enough to cause the fragile shell I had built up over the past 3 years to crumble. But Olivia wasn't ready to stop. "Stability is good," she continued, her tone almost flattering but also full of hidden meaning. "Not everyone can do big things like Daniel or me. You know, Daniel is expanding into Europe. That takes strategic vision and determination. It can't be done by just typing." She laughed, and several relatives joined in, as if it were a witty joke. A wave of bitterness rose in my chest. I swallowed the familiar hurt, the feeling of being overlooked, left out, misunderstood that had haunted me for so long. I stood there, silent as a shadow on the edge of the spotlight, carrying within me a secret career that no one knew about, a success that I was forced to hide. Daniel's gaze, doubting and thoughtful, flipped over me again. I wondered if he really recognized me. Emily Harper, the strong lawyer he had once trusted? Or was I just another face in the crowd? The tension between Olivia and me was like an undercurrent, so tense that the slightest touch would be enough to send everything crashing down. I stood silently at the corner of the room, but my mind had already left reality, drifting back to my childhood memories of Seattle, where it all began. The old images came alive like slow motion. The old house with its large, shady garden, family gatherings filled with laughter, and Olivia, always the center of attention. She was 6 years older than me, but the gap was like an ocean, vast and unbridgeable. Olivia was beautiful, smart, and always knew how to make her parents, James and Margaret Harper, proud of her. Although my parents loved their children dearly, the bias crept in quietly, painfully obvious. I remember being a studious, introverted child, and especially fond of dry law books that others often dismissed as boring. From a young age, I was fascinated by the fierce debates and fiery trials in movies, and nurtured the dream of becoming a lawyer. someone who would stand before the bar to protect justice. I still remember the pride I felt when I won academic awards, especially in debate competitions, where I shined. But those achievements seemed not enough to move my parents' hearts. They were like small fireworks under the bright sky that Olivia had soon occupied. I still remember clearly the day I won the state speech contest, a victory that stunned the whole school. I brought the small trophy home, eagerly holding it up to show my father. "Dad, I won!" I shouted, my heart pounding with anticipation of recognition. James Harper just smiled slightly, nodded slightly. "Good job, son. Good job. But did you learn to cook like Olivia?" Girls should also learn these things so that they can take care of their families in the future. His words were gentle, but to me it was like a bucket of cold water poured straight on the fire that was burning inside me. All the pride disappeared in an instant, giving way to a numbing sense of loss. My mother, Margaret Harper, often said, "Olivia is always surrounded by friends. She is so lively and lovely. Emily is always buried in her books and looks so pale." She said it with concern, but her eyes always had an unnamed comparison. Little did they know, those unintentional words silently dug deep into my heart, sowing the seeds of inferiority and insecurity that were hard to erase. While I tried my best to prove myself, Olivia just had to step out and the whole world smiled at her. She won the school beauty pageant. My parents happily hugged her tightly. "Our daughter is the best. She is both beautiful and has leadership qualities." I had never had the honor to hear such compliments. Even when I shared my dream of becoming a lawyer, Olivia just laughed. "A lawyer? You think you are a superhero? Reading thick books all day must be boring." My parents did not blame her, nor did they defend me. They just laughed and quickly moved on to talking about the parties Olivia attended or the wide social relationships she built. From then on, I learned one thing. If you don't want to get hurt, it's best not to reveal what you love. I gradually became more reserved, more withdrawn, not sharing too much about my personal life, especially about my own successes. I didn't want to compete with Olivia, nor did I want to be her shadow. But at the same time, I also didn't want to be looked down upon forever. Her shadow was too big, so big that I had to shrink myself so as not to be swallowed up. I love my parents, that has never changed. But there is an invisible distance between me and them. The bias, though unintentional, made me understand early on that I had to be independent, to walk my own path. That is what motivated me to pursue an independent life, a journey where I did not need my family's recognition to know that I was valuable. I wanted to prove that I could succeed on my own terms, even if it meant being lonely. I did not want to be Olivia's shadow. I wanted to be myself, a strong, brave, and independent Emily. That Christmas party, 3 years ago, Seattle was freezing cold, but in Aunt Linda's small house, the warmth spread gently. The twinkling lights on the Christmas tree reflected in the glass windows, the melodious Christmas music played like a touch of memory, and the fragrant smell of gingerbread cookies seemed to wrap one's soul in a soft cotton blanket. I sat quietly in a corner of the room, away from the noise, feeling a little more at ease than at large reunions where I always felt like I didn't really belong. I was at the height of my career, a senior attorney at Pearson Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. I had just concluded a major case that had brought millions of dollars to my client and a huge reputation for myself, yet I had never shared this with anyone in my family. Not out of modesty, but because I was so used to having my work overlooked or misunderstood. Aunt Linda, a kind but overly inquisitive woman, approached me, her eyes both curious and gentle. "Emily, how's work going? I heard you work at a big law firm. Maybe you're an office worker or a secretary?" Her question, though very ordinary, accidentally touched on the insecurity I had hidden for a long time. I was slightly startled, trying to keep my smile natural. I do support the lawyers in the company, Auntie," I answered as vaguely as possible. I didn't want to have to explain, and even less wanted to bring up a topic that would invite others to judge or compare. I knew that the truth sometimes didn't carry as much weight as what people were used to believing. Olivia immediately interrupted, as if waiting for this moment in a high-pitched, boastful voice, laced with a wicked sense of humor. "Oh, That's right. Emily works as a errand boy for big lawyers. Paperwork, appointments, little things. No big deal. She winked at Aunt Linda and the other relatives standing nearby, as if she had just told a light but very true joke. Her giggle echoed in my head, like an unappealable verdict. I sat there, silent, deeply tired. I was used to Olivia's sweet contempt, words that seemed harmless but were filled with sharp edges. I didn't want to argue, didn't want to turn the evening into an argument, because I knew that even if I told the truth, they would be skeptical, or would try to twist it into something small and trivial. Partly because I was so exhausted trying to gain recognition. Partly I wanted to test one thing. If I said nothing, would anyone in my family care enough to find out for themselves what my real life was like? Or would they continue to believe Olivia's version of Emily the office worker? I just smiled, dodged, and changed the subject to Aunt Linda's traditional gingerbread. The vague story about my job was quickly swept away by the wave of partying, forgotten as a faint detail. But from that moment on, that little lie began to grow, becoming an invisible but strong wall, increasingly separating me from the embrace of my family. After that night, I continued to pursue my career, quietly and without fanfare. I became one of the top lawyers in the firm, a respected legal expert, respected by my colleagues and partners. I won important victories, won many million-dollar contracts, and built a solid reputation. Outside the door of this house, I was a powerful, intelligent, and capable woman. But every time I crossed that threshold to return to my family, I had to put on the shell of Emily, office worker, a heavy, restrictive coat that did not belong to me. The loneliness grew from there, becoming a coldness that crept into my heart. I lived in two parallel worlds, a strong, confident Emily in court, and a small, reserved Emily in front of her loved ones. I was afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of hurting Olivia's fragile self-esteem, and most of all, I was afraid of seeing the indifferent eyes of my parents when they realized that their daughter was no longer the person they thought she was. I kept wondering, could I continue to live with two opposing egos like that? Or would one day the mask be removed? Not because I chose it, but because the truth could no longer bear to be hidden. Back at the reunion party, I stood quietly in a corner of the living room, but my mind had already left the present, no longer lingering on my childhood memories. Instead, a wave of anxiety was taking over my mind, a worry called Daniel. I looked around the lakeside house, decorated to the last detail. LED lights twinkled like stars along the path to the lake. Fresh flowers were meticulously arranged in elegant crystal vases, and the table was meticulously laid out with expensive dishes. Everything exuded impeccable luxury, an unmistakable Olivia signature. She always wanted everything to be under control, to be dazzling, to overwhelm others. I tried to blend in by helping my mother, Margaret, prepare some snacks in the kitchen. My mother was always gentle and caring, but her questions still revolved around familiar, superficial topics. Is your office work busy these days? Your eyes must be tired from sitting at the computer all the time, huh? The same was true of other relatives. My aunt's cousins and cousins just smiled politely and asked me in the same tone, "Is our little Emily still working at a desk job? It must be easy, not too stressful, right?" I could only smile faintly, answer vaguely, not wanting to go into detail. With each answer, I felt like I was taking on a strange shell, a role that I was too tired to continue. Just then, Olivia walked in, her arm tightly around Daniel. He appeared smart and neat in a luxurious black suit. Olivia quickly dragged him around, as if he were a precious trophy she wanted to display. Her voice was clear and full of pride, especially when talking about Daniel's success. "This is Daniel, your fiancé. He is an excellent businessman, expanding his empire to the global market. He is completely different from those who just sit in the office and collect a monthly salary. Right, Daniel?" The sentence ended with a meaningful glance at me, half teasing, half challenging. I felt a rush of heat run down my spine. Daniel smiled politely as he greeted everyone, and when his eyes landed on me, I saw him pause. Just for a moment, but I was sure I saw a hesitation in his eyes, a flash of recognition, a hint of confusion. My heart pounded. Some old feeling welled up like an undercurrent. Yes, I recognized him. Daniel Moore, The CEO of a famous technology company was the man who had been my client in an international copyright case 3 years ago. Memories flooded back in slow motion. The tense meetings that lasted late into the night in his office. The nights I spent racking my brain over every contract clause, every detail of strategy. I remembered the heated debates we had over risks and solutions. And I remembered the glorious moment of victory. The case had ended in a perfect outcome. He shook my hand, his eyes filled with admiration and gratitude. "Emily, you are a genius. You saved my company." He had said it. Now he was standing in front of me, my sister's fiancé, and I was still just an office worker in the eyes of my family. I chose to remain silent, partly because I didn't want to ruin the atmosphere of the party, and partly because I was too used to the mask I was wearing. I told myself, if Daniel didn't remember, then let things pass in silence. Maybe he just thought I looked familiar. That's all. Olivia didn't stop, however. She continued to talk about her international marketing work, singing Daniel's praises as if she were writing a copy for a luxury brand. The more she listened, the heavier the atmosphere became. I felt like I was being suffocated in a tight cocoon, a cocoon made of lies, things no one bothered to verify. And Daniel's presence was causing that cocoon to begin to crack. Every glance from him was like a gentle tapping on the secret I had kept hidden for the past 3 years. I suddenly felt uneasy. How much longer could I keep this secret when my former close legal partner was standing before me, and his eyes, though not speaking, were filled with questions? Dinner began. Everyone gathered around the long, elaborately set table in the outdoor dining area. The flickering candlelight reflected off the crystal glasses, the clinking of glasses as a friendly greeting, and the murmur of gossip created a picture of warmth and intimacy. But to me, the atmosphere was suffocatingly heavy. I sat among my family members, struggling to maintain a calm exterior, while inside I was raging an undercurrent of anger. Olivia, like a star who never leaves the stage, quickly became the center of every conversation. She talked endlessly about her achievements, her high-class social connections, and did not forget to sprinkle in flowery praise for Daniel. She told of how he built his fortune from scratch, of his bold decisions and admirable vision. But hidden behind that veneer of admiration were subtle stabs aimed directly at me. Only those who had witnessed the secret war between us sisters could understand the sharpness of them. "Our Daniel is very ambitious," Olivia said, her voice high and artificially sweet. "He's never satisfied with sitting around, typing away at a keyboard and waiting for his paycheck to hit his bank account every month. Right, honey?" As soon as she finished speaking, her eyes flicked to me with a subtle, mocking smile. Every word she spoke was like a thin, sharp, deep knife cutting straight into my pride. "But Emily is different," she continued, her voice filled with arrogance. "She likes stability, safety. Being an office worker is good, right, Emily? Less pressure, less risk. Not everyone has the guts to enter the fierce business world like you, or Daniel." She emphasized the two words office worker as if it were an accusation, and her smile, sweet but full of poison, became the second stab. I kept a surprisingly calm face. I smiled, nodded slightly as if I didn't care. But deep inside, a rift was opening. I was used to hiding my true feelings, a survival skill ingrained in me after years of living in Olivia's shadow. I saw the contempt in my sister's eyes, and worse, the silent approval from my parents. They just smiled, sometimes nodded, unaware that their daughter was being openly mocked. Feeling abandoned by my own family made me feel more alone than ever. Daniel sat next to Olivia, but his eyes kept silently examining me. He frowned, slightly confused, as if trying to remember something buried. I could see the discomfort in the way he squeezed his glass, the way his fingers curled as if he were holding back something he hadn't said yet. Every time Olivia made a sarcastic remark, I caught his eyes on me. A look that held not just suspicion, but also surprise, a little unease. He didn't say anything, but the silence sounded like a knock on the door of the past we were both trying to keep hidden. Olivia's every word was like a drop of water in my cup of tolerance, and it was filling up, so full that one more word would spill over. I began to wonder if this was the right time to end this drama. Olivia was relentlessly pushing me into a corner, and my silence was like an invitation for her to continue her mental torture. The secret I was keeping was becoming a huge burden, squeezing me tighter and tighter, suffocating me. I was afraid of disappointing my parents, afraid of hurting Olivia, afraid of losing the peace I had worked so hard to build. But the more I listened to my sister humiliate me in front of everyone, the more I felt a smoldering fire begin to burn in my chest. Perhaps that fire was a sign that it was time for me to choose, to continue to suffer and bury myself, or to step into the light, to speak the truth even if it might blow everything up like a storm. The dinner continued in an atmosphere thick with tension. Olivia, immersed in her own imagined victory, seemed reluctant to let it go. She raised her glass, her lips curved in a satisfied smile, her eyes sweeping over me as if she were delivering one last teasing remark. "Oh, by the way," she said, her voice deliberately drawn out. "Emily, did you know that Daniel once handled a major lawsuit involving some software copyright?" It sounds so confusing. All that high-level stuff. Surely an office worker like you wouldn't understand all that? She emphasized each word office worker and paperwork with sweet mockery, accompanied by a disdainful eyebrow raise. The words fell like a small but poisonous arrow, piercing my heart in front of everyone. The whole table suddenly fell silent. The sounds of knives and forks, the clinking of glasses were now swallowed up in everyone's breathless silence. All eyes turned to me, as if waiting for a reaction, or a fall. I felt a fire of anger rise in my chest, but I tried to keep it at bay. Not because I was afraid of Olivia, but because I knew a single word of disclosure could forever change my place in this family. But then, it was not me, but Daniel who broke the silence first. He set his glass down firmly on the table. The sound was small, but it rang out like a warning drum in the middle of a battlefield. His face was now completely sober, his eyes fixed on me. No more doubt, no more doubt. Just recognition and determination. "Olivia, you were wrong," Daniel said, his voice soft but powerful enough to freeze the entire table. "Emily is not the office worker you think she is." An invisible thunderclap seemed to strike everyone. Olivia blinked, her expression blank for a moment. My parents were stunned as well. Their eyes shifted from Daniel to me, then back to Olivia, as if trying to piece together the puzzle pieces that had just fallen onto the dining table. Daniel turned to me, his eyes now completely different. No longer the vague man from the party, but the businessman who had stood by my side during the tense days in court. "I remember you very well, Emily. 3 years ago, in the international software copyright case, you were the lead attorney of the law firm that represented us. Not only did you save my company from bankruptcy, but you also helped us recover all the copyrights that had been infringed. I never thought I would forget that face." His voice was steady, without raising his voice, enough to make no one doubt him. The words burned away the last layer of my defense. I felt something inside me snap, not from pain, but from release. I took a deep breath, squeezing the napkin in my lap to steady myself. When I spoke, my voice shook slightly at first, but then became firm and clear. "Yes," I said, looking directly at Olivia, then at each of my family members. "I'm Emily Harper. I'm a senior intellectual property and commercial attorney at Pearson Associates, and I'm the one representing Daniel in that case." The words rang out like a tap on the thin layer of ice that had settled over the table. The entire table froze. My father's mouth dropped open. My mother's hand clutched her chest, her eyes lost in thought. No one said a word. The silence was no longer one of restraint, but of total shock. Olivia looked as if she had been slapped in the face. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her lips moving silently. "What? No, you're lying," she blurted out, her voice almost a scream. "I'm just a lowly office worker. You dare to lie to all of us?" My father, James Harper, turned to me in disbelief. "Emily, are you serious? Why have you never told me this?" My mother was still speechless, just looking at me as if I were someone else. But Daniel was the one who delivered the final blow of confirmation. "Everything she said was true," he said, his eyes serious. "Emily was the one who turned the case around." No one in my firm, including me, will ever forget her. Her sharpness, her dedication, her strategic thinking, it was beyond anything we could have imagined. He turned to look at Olivia, his voice no longer angry but disappointed. You should know that looking down on others will never make you superior. The words were like a knife in the back. Olivia could barely contain herself. Every illusion she had built up over dinner, every sarcastic remark, every vicious attack, now collapsed before her eyes. She stood up, throwing the chair back, and dashed into the house as if to escape the truth. I sat there, surrounded by candlelight and alcohol, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Not exactly relief, but real. I was no longer hiding. My eyes scanned each of my loved ones, searching for some understanding, some warmth, but I also knew, from this moment on, everything had changed forever. After Olivia's outburst, the party dissolved in a heavy and suffocatingly awkward atmosphere. The initial joy disappeared without a trace, leaving behind an awkward silence like a fog that no one dared to dispel. The guests looked at each other hesitantly, then one by one found an excuse to pack up their things and gently excuse themselves to leave, as if they had just left the scene of a mental collision. The music also stopped. The lights in the garden seemed to dim, leaving only uneasy gaps and unspoken words. Daniel moved closer to me, his face filled with deep remorse. His eyes looked at me with not only regret, but also admiration and confusion. Emily, I'm sorry I put you in that position. I couldn't stand to see Olivia continue to humiliate you like that. His voice was low, sincere but tired, like someone who had just gone through an emotional battle. I shook my head, trying to stay calm as I returned his gaze. It's okay, Daniel. Maybe this should have happened a long time ago. I'm tired of living in the shadows, hiding who I really am. As I said it, I felt a quiet relief spread through my chest. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. Then he turned away, heading for the door Olivia had disappeared through, a worried look on his face, as if he finally understood that he couldn't hide from the truth any longer. I turned around to face my parents, James and Margaret, who were still sitting there like statues, unable to believe what had just happened. Their eyes were filled with shock, hurt, and an indescribable emotion, a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Perhaps in their minds, I would always be the obscure child, never prominent enough to need to hide anything. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. Dad, Mom, I'm sorry for hiding it. But I did it because I always felt like I was never good enough in your eyes. I tried so hard, achieved success, but all these years, all I got in return was comparison, indifference, and the feeling of never being enough. My voice trembled. The emotions that had been buried deep inside me for so many years were surging up, unable to be contained. I'm tired of trying to be seen when all my efforts are overshadowed by Olivia's perfect image. I don't want to be better or worse than anyone else. I just want to be loved for who I am, not for what I've accomplished. The words were a sharp cut through the layers of self-consciousness. As they left my lips, I felt as if I had been freed from a weight that had been weighing on my heart for a lifetime. Margaret stared at me, her eyes red, and then tears fell silently. I didn't know you were so emotional. I'm sorry, Emily. I just thought Olivia was weaker, needed more support. I didn't expect to make you feel so abandoned. Her voice was choked, trembling, lost in her unheard thoughts. My father, James, let out a long, heavy breath, as if he were facing something he could not explain. I don't understand why you would hide this from us. Being a lawyer, it's an honorable profession. Why didn't you tell us? He looked at me with eyes that were a mixture of pity and bewilderment, the look of someone who had never expected to lose the truth in his own home. I felt relieved to have spoken the truth, but at the same time I felt weighed down by the confusion and disconnection that remained in their eyes. I understood that this was not a conversation that would resolve everything immediately. They needed time to think, to reflect on their own role in my cracks. I'll take my leave first. I think we all need some time to calm down, I said softly, my voice steady again. I stood up and left the house, the place that used to be a warm home, now filled with broken silence and unanswered gazes. As I drove back to my small apartment in downtown Seattle, I pondered, was this truth the first step toward healing, or was it just deepening old wounds? I felt relieved to finally be alive, but the anxiety about the future of my family relationship weighed heavily on me. I knew this was not the end. It was just the beginning of a long, arduous journey to heal what had been forgotten for too long. The next morning, the morning sun filtered through the large windows of my small Seattle apartment, bathing the space in a strangely soft light. I was making coffee, trying to push away the lingering thoughts from the night before, when the doorbell rang. I couldn't hide my surprise when I saw Daniel standing there. He looked visibly tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a look of weariness that looked like he hadn't slept all night. His usual polite demeanor seemed clouded by a heavy brooding. "Emily, I hope I'm not disturbing you," he began, his voice hesitant. I need to talk to you." His eyes were complicated, a mix of guilt, sincerity, and something else that was hard to name. I opened the door wider and gently invited him in. "Please, would you like a cup of coffee?" I asked, trying to sound calm despite the curiosity welling up inside me. Daniel sat down on the sofa, letting out a long sigh. He was silent for a few minutes, as if trying to sort out the jumbled pieces of his mind. Finally, he looked up, his gaze fixed on me. "Last night, after Olivia left, we had a tense conversation. She was very angry. She yelled a lot. But then, finally, she admitted it." He paused as if gathering the courage to continue. "Emily, Olivia has exaggerated a lot about her career," he said, his voice low. "She's not the marketing director she brags about. She's actually a mid-level employee in a small department, without as much power or influence as she appears to everyone." I felt a vague pain run through my chest. Despite my suspicions, I didn't think the truth would come out this way. Daniel went on to explain that Olivia had lived in a shell built from a sense of inferiority, from the pressure to outdo me. She always felt like she had to be more successful than me to gain approval, from her family, from society, and perhaps even from herself. She said she felt like she always had to surpass me, always have something to prove, Daniel said, his eyes lost in a distant memory. She said I was so perfect, smart, talented, and she was afraid of being overshadowed, scared that if she didn't have a glamorous life, she would never get the attention her parents gave me. I sat there, my mind racing with surprise and sympathy. Olivia had always been the strong, confident, pampered one, and I was the one struggling for acceptance. But now I realized she was fighting too, in a quiet, lonely way just like me. "So," I sighed softly, feeling like a heavy stone was being lifted from my chest. "We both live under pressure and expectation, but we each choose different ways to cope. I hide my true self to avoid comparison, and she exaggerates herself to avoid being looked down upon. We both crave the same thing: recognition and unconditional love." Daniel nodded, his eyes sad but also enlightened. "I've thought a lot about what happened," he said, his voice low. "I love Olivia, but I can't continue to build a relationship on lies. I've decided to postpone the wedding. I need time, and so does Olivia. She needs to face the things she's been avoiding." He stood up, thanked me for listening. Then he left, leaving behind a deep silence in the room, and in me. I sat there for a long time, my mind filled with thoughts about Olivia and the sisterly relationship that seemed to be framed by an old definition. It turned out that behind that proud exterior, my sister was just a woman struggling with the fear of being abandoned, of being forgotten. Perhaps this moment was the first step towards us truly understanding each other, after so many years of assumptions and silence. I was still deep in thought about my conversation with Daniel when the doorbell rang again, just a few hours after he left. When I opened the door, I was completely surprised to see Olivia standing there. I almost didn't recognize her. The confident, well-groomed woman from the party last night was gone. Olivia was disheveled. Her hair was disheveled, her face bare of makeup, her eyes red and puffy from crying all night. She had a vulnerability and vulnerability written all over her face, something I had never seen before. Are you home, Emily? Her voice was hoarse and weak, a far cry from her usual clear, sharp tone. I stood there for a moment, speechless with shock. I had never imagined Olivia would show up at my door like this. Without hesitation, I quietly opened the door wider and stepped aside to invite her in. Olivia walked slowly into the room and sat down on the sofa as if she had no strength left in her. She said nothing for a few minutes, just sighed heavily, rubbing her temples with both hands. I sat across from her, not interrupting the silence, just waiting respectfully. Then finally, she looked up. Her eyes were glistening with tears, looking straight at me, as if searching for a way out. You were right, Emily. You were absolutely right, she said, her voice shaking. I lied. I'm not the marketing director I used to say I was. I'm just a regular employee at a small company. Nothing special. I exaggerated everything. To my parents, to my friends, to Daniel. I'm so sorry. The words poured out like a pent-up waterfall, washing away all the masks Olivia had worn to maintain her perfect image. Tears began to fall, each one heavy and rolling down her cheeks. I did it because I never felt good enough. You were always smart, talented, calm. Your parents were proud of you, even though they never said it. And I was like a shadow beside you, always trying to be seen. I created a version of Olivia that I thought people would accept. I listened quietly, each word stirring something inside me. Because I knew that feeling, the feeling of having to wear a mask, of having to hide so as not to be hurt. I had lived a life of hiding too. I understand, Olivia, I replied softly, each word delivered with unprecedented sincerity. I always thought of you as someone who was loved, someone who was cared for by your parents. I tried so hard to be noticed, to prove myself, but then I felt like all my efforts were invisible. I hid my true career because I was afraid of being compared, afraid of being looked down upon. I just wanted to be myself, without having to prove anything. For the first time in years, we sat across from each other and opened up about our deepest insecurities. We began to realize that we were both struggling in the same ocean of pressure, from family expectations, from societal prejudices, from the need to excel and be recognized. Olivia chose to exaggerate to get noticed, and I chose to shrink to avoid being hurt. Though the expressions were different, the underlying wounds were identical. I'm so proud of you, Emily, Olivia said, wiping away the tears that still stained her cheeks. I always knew you were smart, but I never expected you to be so brilliant that I felt overshadowed. I was afraid you would become the only light everyone looked to. Me too, Olivia. I took her hand, feeling the tremble beneath her delicate skin. I always thought you had it all. The confidence, the support of your parents, the success, and I could never catch up. Olivia was silent for a moment, then lowered her head and said softly, almost in a whisper, Daniel, he knows everything. He postponed the wedding. Do you think he will leave me? I sighed, my eyes staring into space. I don't know, sis, but I think the only thing he needs is honesty. He needs time. And so do you. You need time to forgive yourself before you expect anyone else to forgive you. The conversation ended in silence, but this time it was a gentle silence, no longer stifling or tense. We both felt lighter, even though there were still things ahead that could not be named. A door had just opened, revealing a new path, unclear, but hopeful. Perhaps for the first time in all these years, we had laid the first bricks of a true sisterhood. No more competition, no more masks, just understanding and sincerity. A week after my emotional meeting with Olivia, my father, James, called and asked the whole family to gather at his house for dinner. His voice was deep and heavy, and he couldn't hide the seriousness that made me understand. The time had come when none of us could avoid it any longer. When I arrived, Daniel was there, sitting next to Olivia. The atmosphere in the dining room, despite the careful preparation, was thick with an indescribable tension. My parents looked more haggard than usual, their eyes filled with worry. The meal began in an oppressive silence, broken only by the clatter of knives and forks against plates and stifled sighs. Everyone was waiting for something, or rather, for someone to speak first. Finally, my father, James Harper, put down his chopsticks, his gaze sweeping around the table. "I think it's time we had a frank talk," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "About what happened at the party, and about the things you've been keeping from us. We can't pretend like nothing happened anymore." Olivia, despite showing me her weakness a few days ago, was still a little defensive. She turned to me, her eyes shining with reproach. You deliberately embarrassed me in front of everyone, right, Emily? Is that your way of getting back at me for all those times I teased you?" I looked her straight in the eye, shaking my head slowly. "No, Olivia. I don't mean to humiliate you. I just couldn't take it anymore. I tried to accept being looked down upon compared to overlooked. But at some point, I couldn't continue to hide in your shadow. I was tired of hiding myself just to keep the peace in a family where recognition was always one-sided." My voice trembled slightly, each word heavy as stone, carrying years of accumulated hurt. My words made Olivia speechless. She bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. "What do you think? You've always been the model child, the one your parents talked about. I've always had to work twice as hard just to be seen. I've been obsessed with surpassing you, proving that I'm worthy too. I've tried to project a perfect image, not because I wanted to lie, but because I was afraid that if I didn't, I would be nothing in my parents' eyes." Daniel, an outsider who knew both of them well, spoke calmly, rationally, but no less sympathetically. "I think both of them feel hurt, just in different ways. Olivia is trying to be recognized, while Emily chooses to stay silent, to step back because she doesn't see her place. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about our family inadvertently creating an environment where no one dares to be themselves." Daniel's words were a wake-up call for my parents. They looked at each other, then at us, the two girls they thought they knew. Shock flashed in their eyes, then silently turned to regret. None of them had expected silence, unconscious bias, to leave such deep scars. My mother, Margaret, burst into tears. "Oh my gosh, I didn't expect. I just wanted you to succeed, wanted the best for both of you. I was so focused on what your sister needed, I didn't realize that Emily needed to be loved too, in her own way." My father, James, shook his head slightly. His voice choked up. I didn't think I could be so remiss. I was so proud of Olivia, so public, that I forgot that Emily was my daughter too, worthy of praise, worthy of being heard. I'm sorry, girls." They finally realized it was the lopsided parenting, lack of communication, and invisible pressure to succeed that had sown the seeds of an insidious competition, causing both of us to grow up in a race neither of us wanted to join. One always had to prove herself, the other chose to hide so as not to be hurt. That dinner, which was supposed to be a reunion, turned into a big confession. Not easy, not gentle, but necessary. It is not the end, but the beginning. A new journey where truth is acknowledged, wounds begin to be named, and hope, however fragile, begins to be kindled between people who thought they could no longer understand each other. After the emotional outbursts and painful confessions, the atmosphere in the dining room gradually calmed. Though the tension was still there, I could sense something changing. A door opening, a place where understanding began to seep in. My parents, James and Margaret, looked at my sister and me with sad, remorseful eyes. They truly recognized their mistake, and that to me meant a lot. My father spoke first. His voice was deep but filled with an unspeakable remorse. "I'm sorry, Emily. Olivia, I didn't realize what you were going through. I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing, expecting, without stopping to listen to what you were really feeling. I was wrong to compare you to me. Wrong to make Emily feel like she was always second. Wrong to make Olivia pretend to be perfect just to be accepted." His voice broke. Tears streamed down his weathered face. For the first time, I saw my father so naked and vulnerable. My mother, Margaret, could not hold back her tears. She put her arms around us, holding both Olivia and mine tightly. I am sorry too, my children. I thought I was loving, but I was hurting. I was not sensitive enough to see the cracks in your hearts. I thought I was encouraging, but I did not know that I was pressuring you. I promise from now on I will learn to love you more equally. No longer compare, no longer impose. I will really listen, to understand what you need, not what I want. Olivia, tears streaming down her cheeks, looked up at her parents, then at me. Her voice was soft but firm. I'm sorry. I lied about my career because I was scared. I was scared I'd never live up to it, scared I'd fall short of Emily and disappoint you. I'd lived in that mask for so long I'd forgotten who I really was. I thought if I wasn't the best, I wasn't worthy of being loved. When it was my turn, I knew I needed to let down all my defenses, to let my feelings be fully expressed. I'm also sorry, Ma, for hiding things, for choosing silence as a way to protect myself. I thought that if I didn't say anything, if I didn't brag, I wouldn't be compared, wouldn't be hurt. But in the end, that silence made me lonely. It made the relationship between me and my sister more and more distant. I was wrong for not believing that I could be loved without hiding anything. Every layer of cover, every assumption, every misunderstanding that had accumulated over the years fell away in that room. In its place was honesty, tears that were no longer hidden, a slow but profound release. For the first time in many years, we, the Harper family, dared to face the truth, to face each other's wounds. I turned to Olivia, and she looked at me. There was no competition in her eyes, no guilt, just understanding and a pure sisterly love that we had thought we had lost. A small, tear-stained smile played on her lips. We'll try to be better sisters, Emily, I promise. I squeezed her hand. I believe in you. I believe that this time we can do it, together. The Harper family, although still scarred and taking time to heal, had a real turning point. My parents promised to encourage both of us to pursue our own paths, no longer holding us to restrictive standards. Daniel, who had silently witnessed everything, nodded slightly, his eyes softening as if he was witnessing something sacred. We knew the road ahead would be challenging, but at least we had taken the first steps. A new chapter had begun, a chapter of empathy, of true, unconditional love. 3 months have passed since that tense conversation at their parents' house, and the Harpers' lives have been quietly but steadily changing for the better. The wounds don't heal overnight, but the first steps on the journey to healing have been taken. Small, hopeful steps toward a brighter future. I saw the change most clearly in Olivia. She began working with a therapist, learning to confront the deep wounds and the intense yearning for approval that she had harbored for so long. She spent 1 hour a week being honest with herself, about her fear of failing, about the pressure to be perfect, and about the polished facade she had worn as armor to hide her inner vulnerabilities. I'm tired of pretending to be okay, Olivia told me on a late-night phone call, her voice much softer than before. I'm learning to accept myself for who I am, with what I have, instead of what I thought my parents or the world expected of me. Olivia and Daniel's relationship is also being rebuilt, not with hasty promises, but with patience and honesty. They have decided to postpone their wedding indefinitely, not because they are having problems, but because they want their love to be on a stronger foundation. Instead of lavish parties, there are simple evenings, slow hand-holding in the park, and conversations that last for hours. Daniel listens calmly to Olivia, and also shares his own insecurities. Acceptance comes from both sides, simple but powerful. I believe that is the clearest sign of a mature love. A new bond had been forged between Olivia and me. No longer the fragments of competition, but sincerity and commitment. Every week we met at my favorite little cafe or walked along the river as the city began to fall. We talked about work, everyday feelings, the past and the future, things we had never dared to bring up before. Once, Olivia asked me about a complicated case I was working on, and I found myself comfortable sharing it with her. No need to hide, no longer afraid of being judged. That openness made me feel strangely relieved. My parents, James and Margaret, were also learning how to parent again. They were no longer just asking about formalities, but actually caring about our feelings and efforts. They praised my achievements sincerely, without reserve or comparison. My mother once visited my apartment with flowers and a small gift to congratulate me on winning a big lawsuit. My father also called more often, no longer just about Olivia's successes, but with genuine questions about my work and life. They also encouraged Olivia to pursue her own passions, even if it wasn't the glamorous path they had hoped for. For the first time in a long time, I felt that their love for us was fair and unconditional. For my part, I let go of my fear of being judged. I no longer shy away from sharing my work, my challenges, and my professional pride. The feeling of being my true self, of being able to speak my mind without being defensive, gave me a profound freedom I had never known. I started participating in mentoring programs for young female lawyers, sharing not only my professional skills, but also my personal journey. I told them about the pressure, the self-doubt, and most importantly, the confidence, something I had worked so hard to build. I wanted them to understand that their worth lies not in the eyes of others, but in the courage to be themselves. Life goes on, with its struggles, its bumps, and its unpredictability. But I believe with sincerity, with effort from both sides, and with true love, my family is embarking on a new journey. An imperfect journey, but real, and stronger than ever. Over the next few months, Olivia and I continued to develop a gentle and positive relationship. We made it a habit to meet every Sunday morning at my favorite little cafe, a place with warm light streaming through large glass windows and the aroma of baked goods mixed with the aroma of dark roasted coffee. There, we could talk freely, from work to private feelings that were hard to name. There was no trace of the rivalry or jealousy that had simmered, only sincerity, understanding, and a gentle, precious affection that I never thought I would have for my sister. One morning, Olivia walked into the cafe with a big smile and the local newspaper in her hand. Her eyes were filled with a rare joy. "Have you seen this?" she asked, her voice full of excitement as she held the paper out to me. "They called you Lawyer of the Year. That case with the energy company was a huge hit. I'm so proud of you, Emily." I took the paper, smiling gently. Her compliment now sounded less forced or implied than before. It was a natural recognition from a sister who had let go of the pressure to compete. "Thank you," I replied. "I understand that I don't need to hide what I've done or shy away from the light of my success." I started telling her about my personal journey, my journey to finding my true voice. I used to believe that keeping things to myself was a way to avoid being hurt, to avoid comparisons. But that made me isolated and lost. I locked myself in a cage of my own making, afraid of recognition. When I learned to be honest with myself, when I dared to speak up and share, I felt truly free. And I also realized that you used to carry the same pressures as me, just in a different way. Olivia nodded slowly, her eyes distant but thoughtful. "Yes," she whispered. "I spent so many years pretending to be happy, trying to be the success everyone expected of me, only to feel like I was nothing. Pretending doesn't make you stronger. On the contrary, it drains you. Authenticity. That's what makes me feel alive." A few weeks later, the Harpers gathered at their parents' lake house to celebrate their wedding anniversary. The atmosphere was different from the tense reunion dinner. Instead of judgmental looks and innuendo, the house was filled with laughter, simple stories, and the full presence of family. No one had to hide behind a facade anymore. My father, James, stood up and raised his glass, his voice choked but full of warmth. "I want to thank you, Emily and Olivia. You have taught us valuable lessons about understanding, honesty, and unconditional love. We are proud of what you have accomplished in your careers, but even more proud of the people you have become. If we have ever been wrong, if we have not listened enough, we apologize today. And from now on, we will be a family that is meant to be loved, without judgment, without conditions." I looked around the room. The afternoon light was falling on the sparkling lake through the window. My mother was holding Olivia's hand, whispering something that made them both laugh. Daniel and Olivia exchanged warm, peaceful glances. I felt the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place, imperfectly but truly. I knew that Olivia and I would have disagreements, but our relationship was now built on a foundation of respect and genuine affection. We were no longer two strangers living in the same childhood home, but two grown women, daring to look at each other with eyes that were no longer burdened. The Harper family, after so many ups and downs, has found each other again, not in expectations or roles, but in acceptance. We have learned to love without comparing, to listen without judging, to forgive ourselves. A gentle peace spread through me. The road to this moment was not smooth. There were tears, there was hurt, there was silence, but I knew it was worth it. I knew it was because in the end, we learned the most valuable lesson: being ourselves, being loved in our truth. That is the most precious thing in life. Thank you for listening to my story.